Beneath the shattered sky's mournful shroud, a god of death, once crowned, now unbowed, surveys his fallen, his legions' disgrace, their defeat etched deep in the earth's cold face. From shadow's embrace his dark power swells, a chant through the night, like a wind from hells. With each whispered curse, the ground stirs, bereft, as he summons anew the undead, left deft. No longer mere pawns in a mortal's played game, these creatures rise fierce, with eyes of flame. The balance once broken now shifts 'neath their tread, for the era of living has quietly bled. A new kingdom looms on the brink of this night, where the undead god reigns in unhallowed light. His army, once fallen, now starkly reformed, in a world where the living will soon be transformed. So beware, ye still breathing, the tide has now turned, for the undead god marches, and his wrath unspurned. The rise of Necros. The battlefield lay silent, a grim tableau of defeat, where the remnants of the undead sprawled across the muddy ground. This was not an isolated scene. Nearby another battlefield told a similar tale. Here too, the undead had been vanquished, their forms scattered and broken under a bleak sky. They had become the weakest player in the supernatural struggle for dominance, their powers exploited and drained by others to bolster different, more powerful entities. Once feared, the undead now seemed on the brink of becoming an afterthought in the annals of supernatural warfare. As dusk crept across these desolate fields, a peculiar disturbance unfolded on one such abandoned battleground. The earth trembled slightly, unnoticed at first, then more insistently, from the center of the devastation. Amidst the bodies of his fallen warriors, the ground split, and a figure rose. This was no ordinary undead. This was Necros, the undead god, now embodying the form of what he ruled. Necros stood tall, his visage a terrifying blend of decay and divine wrath. He surveyed the field with a cold, contemptuous gaze. The sight of his race, once powerful and now reduced to mere tools by others, filled him with a dark fury. He sensed not only the physical defeats, but also felt the meddling of other gods in the affairs of his creations, the interference that had tilted the scales against his own. With a grim determination, Necros decided that the time had come to assert his dominion and restore the undead to their rightful place in the supernatural hierarchy. Raising his arms towards the darkening heavens, he chanted in a tongue forgotten by time. The air around him crackled with power, a stark contrast to the quietude of the battlefield. As he invoked his divine might, the fallen undead began to stir. One by one they rose, their eyes now glowing with the fire of the gods, his fire. Necros imbued them with a portion of his own divine essence, transforming these once defeated creatures into avatars of his wrath and will. The balance has changed, Necros proclaimed, his voice echoing like thunder over the fields. Since the emergence of the supernaturals on this earth, and the undead unleashed by man, a new balance within nature's world was formed, one where the undead now walked this earth, and I, Necros, will ensure their victory. With this new army of divinely empowered undead, Necros prepared to march. This time, he would not be a bystander in the supernatural conflicts. He would lead from the front, wielding power beyond comprehension, ready to tip the scales and rewrite the rules of engagement. The undead, under his direct command, would no longer be pawns, but key players in the shaping of the world's fate. The rise of Necros marked a new chapter in the supernatural wars, a chapter where the undead god would no longer tolerate the abuse and exploitation of his children. The night was about to witness the wrath of a god long thought defeated, and with him, the resurrection of the undead as a formidable force on the global supernatural stage. The unseen power. The morning was crisp and still in the woodland community, a hidden refuge tucked away from the chaos that often ruled the outer world. A scout, part of a small group responsible for patrolling the area, was the first to spot the danger. "Here comes another group of them," he shouted back to his comrades, his eyes fixed on a small cluster of figures shambling towards their position. "There's only around 10. We can take them easily," he confidently added. The scout group, comprising 5 members, was seasoned in dealing with such threats. The undead were a common nuisance, and this group had honed their skills in culling these creatures, turning their routine into an almost mundane chore. However, today was different. As the first scout approached the undead to deliver a blow that should have easily dispatched one of the figures, he paused, noticing something unsettling. "Their eyes are glowing," he muttered, an edge of uncertainty in his voice. He swung his heavy makeshift weapon, a large, crudely fashioned club, expecting the satisfying crunch of impact. Instead, his strike landed with a hollow thud, as if he had hit a solid wall of stone. The undead creature turned slowly toward him, its glowing eyes piercing the dim light of the forest. With unnerving strength, it grabbed the scout by the arm, lifting him off the ground as if he were no heavier than a child. The other members of the scout team rushed in, swinging their weapons with desperate intensity, but to no avail. Their blows seemed futile, barely causing the creature to flinch. One by one, the other undead creatures moved with unnatural speed and strength, grabbing the remaining scouts. The sounds of struggle were brief. The eerie power of these new undead left the scouts overwhelmed and powerless. From a distance, their screams cut through the quiet woods, sending a chilling warning to the hidden community, followed by a haunting silence that spoke of a grim fate. The small group of empowered undead continued their advance, moving with purposeful strides towards the heart of the hidden community. Their knowledge of its location, somehow precise and calculated, suggested a guiding force beyond mere instinct or random wandering. This encounter marked a terrifying realization for the community. The undead, once easily managed threats, had evolved into something far more formidable. The new strength they exhibited hinted at a darker influence, reshaping the landscape of power within the supernatural world. As the community braced for what was coming, a deep-seated fear took root. The balance had indeed shifted, and survival now depended on facing an enemy unlike any they had known before. The desecration of the graveyard. In the heart of the hidden woodland community, the early tranquility was shattered by the shrill blare of an alarm. A guard perched atop a lookout post barked down urgently. "A group of around 15 undead coming this way." The news sent a ripple of fear through the community. The undead, now increased by 5 since the last encounter, advanced with relentless determination towards the settlement. As the community's defenders rushed to their posts, weapons at the ready to repel what they expected to be another manageable skirmish, the approaching undead horde veered unexpectedly toward a small, sacred site adjacent to the community, a makeshift graveyard where the fallen members of the community were laid to rest, honored for their sacrifices in past battles of survival. The horde halted at the graveyard's edge, just as the sky rumbled ominously with thunder. Then, amidst the charged air, a chilling scene unfolded. A peculiar figure among the undead, distinct from the others in stature and presence, stepped forward. This was Necros, the undead god, his appearance signaling a dark turning of the tide. With a solemn yet sinister gesture, he raised his hand over the humble graves. Suddenly, the earth trembled, and a ghostly light emanated from beneath the soil. One by one, the graves began to stir, and the bodies of the community's fallen heroes rose from their eternal slumber. The sight of friends and family, now reanimated with blazing fiery eyes akin to their disturber, struck a deep chord of horror and betrayal throughout the community. As quickly as he had appeared, Necros vanished, leaving behind his newly risen army. The undead, with their ranks now grotesquely swollen by the community's own deceased, turned their hollow gazes toward the living, ready to assault the heart of the community. Disgusted and horrified at this profound desecration, the community's guards charged forward to meet the undead with grim resolve. However, their efforts were futile. Their weapons seemed to merely glance off the resilient forms of the undead. One by one, the guards fell, overwhelmed by the supernatural strength of their foes. Mere moments later, those who had fallen rose again, their eyes now alight with the unholy fire of Necros's will, augmenting the ranks of their assailants. In the chaos, the remaining onlookers within the community scrambled to respond. Orders were shouted to lock the gates, but panic had already taken root. As the undead marched inexorably closer, the gates of the woodland community were sealed with trembling hands. The sounds of the approaching undead, a grim march of doom. Inside the walls, the community members gathered, faces pale and hearts pounding with dread. The betrayal of seeing their once valiant defenders, now part of the undead horde, was a psychological blow as crushing as the physical threat looming outside. They braced themselves, knowing that the battle for their survival had taken a dreadful turn. With the enemy now bolstered by their own, the night was set to be long and survival uncertain, as they faced an enemy reborn from their own ranks. The fall of the woodland camp, the relentless battering against the gates, resonated through the woodland community like the ominous drumbeats of an ancient war. Each thud, stark and powerful, was akin to a battering ram smashing into the ancient timbers, powerful and unstoppable. As more undead joined the assault, the force of their combined might became overwhelming. It was not long before the once sturdy gates, which had stood as a beacon of refuge and safety, crumbled and splintered under the supernatural strength of the undead horde. As the gates gave way, the last bastion of hope for the woodland camp's survivors faltered. The small group of remaining defenders, armed with whatever weapons they had scavenged, mounted a desperate resistance. But it was in vain. The new power possessed by the undead, augmented by Necros's divine wrath, was beyond anything the world had previously witnessed. The undead swept through the breaches in the gates like a plague, unstoppable and insidious. The defenders, their numbers already thin from previous skirmishes, and their spirits battered by the sight of their fallen friends turned foes, fought bravely but hopelessly. One by one, they were overwhelmed, not just by the physical might of their attackers, but by the horrific realization of their own impending doom. In the chaos, the tragic story of the undead's resurgence unfolded, a tale of human hubris and supernatural envy. The undead, originally reanimated by man's corruption and relentless experimentation with viruses in a misguided quest for eternal life, had once been a controlled group, relegated to the shadows of myth and nightmare. However, as the elders, driven by their own desperate search for power, began to meddle and siphon the inherent powers of the undead, they inadvertently destabilized the delicate balance of supernatural forces. Necros, the god of the undead, had watched as his creations were exploited and diminished, their powers stolen to bolster the elders' fading might. This desecration had not gone unnoticed or unchallenged. Now, with the return of Necros, A sinister correction was underway. He was not just reclaiming the stolen vitality of his followers, he was reshaping the very fabric of the supernatural hierarchy. As Necros manipulated the balance in retribution for the interference of other supernatural gods, the world was forced to witness the consequences of its own actions. Actions that had brought back the undead into a new era of domination. The woodland community, once a sanctuary of human resilience and hope, became a stark testament to this new reality. The night air was filled with the sounds of despair and destruction as the undead, fueled by divine vengeance, claimed the camp in the name of their once forgotten god. As the last of the resistance faltered, the survivors of the woodland camp were left with a grim choice: flee into the uncertain safety of the dark woods, or succumb to the merciless will of the undead. The legacy of mankind's ambition and the elders' greed had come full circle, leaving a world teetering on the brink of a new dark age, governed by the resurrected power of the undead. Elder led his newly formed cadre of elders through the darkened woods, their shadows merging and stretching as they moved silently towards their target, a human community reputed to be both well hidden and well stocked. Before they broke through the tree line, Elder paused, his voice a whisper that carried through the night. "We shall all feed well tonight, my brothers and sisters, for this camp is rich with the living." As they emerged from the shadows on the outskirts of the woodland community, Elder's anticipation turned to confusion. The gates, usually secure and bustling with activity, were smashed open, hanging off their hinges. There was no sign of struggle, no sounds of life, just an eerie silence that draped over the area like a heavy shroud. He and his group of elders entered the community, which was typically alive with the hustle of human activity. Now it lay deserted. The place was empty. Not a soul stirred. No bodies, living or dead, were to be found. "What is this?" Elder exclaimed, his voice echoing through the abandoned lanes. "I know this place was full of humans. What could have happened?" One of the elders, a keen-eyed vampire named Morven, noted a peculiar detail. "All the bodies in the graveyard have been taken," he reported, his voice low and measured. Elder's mind raced as he processed this information. "Someone got here before us. Someone is taking our stock for themselves," he concluded, his voice tinged with anger and a growing sense of urgency. The thought of another force, powerful enough to clear out an entire community and its graveyard, was both a challenge and a threat to his authority. "I will find out who and put an end to them," Elder declared with a cold finality. His resolve hardened, and his eyes glinted with a predatory gleam. This unexpected turn of events would not deter him. Rather, it stoked the fires of his ambition. Whoever was responsible had unwittingly ignited a new conflict, one that Elder was now eager to engage in. With the night deepening around them, Elder gathered his group of elders. They would need to regroup and gather information. The desolation of what was once a thriving human sanctuary had become the first clue in uncovering a new adversary. Elder knew the path ahead would be fraught with danger and discovery, but he was ready. The game of power and survival was evolving, and he was determined to emerge victorious, no matter the darkness he would have to traverse. The confrontation at the warehouse. Sometime later, Elder returned to his hideout, an abandoned warehouse that had become the clandestine meeting place for his cadre of elders. Inside, he found Serana poring over old texts and maps, searching for any clue that might explain the mystery of the deserted woodland community. Elder relayed the disturbing details of the empty village and the missing bodies, prompting a deep discussion about potential adversaries and the unsettling new dynamics at play. As they debated, a sudden commotion outside the warehouse disrupted their conversation. Peering out through the grimy windows, they spotted a small group of shambling undead approaching their hideout. Elder, irritated by the interruption, snapped, "Someone kill those things, will you?" Expecting a swift resolution, one of the newer elders launched his shadow form at the undead, a technique that had always proved lethal. However, this time, the shadow collided with the undead like hitting a solid wall. The impact was jarring, and the elder was repelled back, stunned and bewildered. "What?" Eldor exclaimed in disbelief. Before they could recover from the shock, the undead seized the opportunity. They advanced, grabbing the disoriented elder and lifting him off the ground as if he weighed nothing. In a panic, the elder transformed into shadow and retreated hastily to Eldor's side. As the undead continued their relentless advance, Serana stepped forward. "Let me try," she declared, slipping into the shadows to reappear behind the undead. She attempted her usual shadow manipulation techniques, but to her frustration, nothing happened. Remembering the silver knife she always carried, Serana swiftly pulled it out and drove it into the head of one of the undead. The creature fell instantly, lifeless to the ground. Serana turned to Eldor with a triumphant smile. "Silver," she whispered through the shadows. She moved like a wraith among the undead, her silver blade flashing in the dim light. One by one, she dispatched the undead, the silver knife disrupting whatever force animated them. Back inside the warehouse, after the immediate threat was neutralized, Serana explained her observations. "Simple physics," she began, cleaning her silver blade. "Silver disrupts the flow of energy within these creatures. A metal like iron consists of positive metal ions and negative electrons that move around the solid between the ions. Silver, having a similar conductive property, seems to interfere with whatever energy animates these undead. It's not just a mythical weakness, it's a disruption of their fundamental energy flow." Eldor listened intently, processing the implications. If silver could disrupt the undead in such a manner, it offered a new weapon and a new strategy against their rising power. This knowledge was a valuable asset, and Eldor knew that leveraging it could tip the scales in their favor in the unfolding supernatural conflict. As they pondered their next moves, the elders realized that the world they knew was rapidly changing, and they would need to adapt just as quickly to survive and reclaim their dominance. Elder convened a meeting with his elders, discussing the shifting dynamics of their supernatural world. They gathered around an old rugged table, the dim light of candles casting long shadows on the walls. "As we've seen," Eldur began, his voice carrying the weight of urgency, "the undead and the Lycan are actively increasing their ranks using humans as stock. It seems we are all converging on a similar strategy." One of the elders, a wise vampire named Martellus, nodded in agreement. "It's true. Every human camp and emerging community becomes a potential reservoir to bolster our numbers. It appears that whoever finds these humans first gains a significant advantage." Eldor leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "This battle will ultimately be won or lost based on how effectively we can convert these humans into our kind. The humans are the ingredient that will determine victory or defeat in this supernatural war." Back at the fort, Captain Harris, Samantha, and Commander Lewis stood surveying the progress of the repairs and enhancements to their defenses. They were remarkably efficient this time around. "There really wasn't that much damage, and most of the defenses were easily rebuilt," Captain Harris remarked, with a hint of relief. As night descended over the fort, Cast in its veil of darkness, a guard on duty spotted something unusual in the distance. "Over there," he shouted, pointing towards the horizon, where a group of shuffling figures was slowly emerging. The burning fire in their eyes was unmistakable. "Undead!" he called out again, his voice tense. The fort sprang into action, every defender readying their weapons, prepared to protect their reclaimed sanctuary. But as the undead drew closer, the guard noticed another group, barely visible in the shadows. It was the elders, 5 of them, engaging the undead in a fierce and chaotic battle. Captain Harris, watching the scene unfold from atop the fort walls, was bewildered. "What is this?" he exclaimed. "Are they actually helping us?" Commander Lewis, joining him at the lookout, squinted towards the battle. "It seems so," he responded thoughtfully. Samantha, ever the strategist, chimed in with a dose of skepticism. "Or maybe they're fighting over who gets the first bite of us," she suggested, her eyes not leaving the melee below. The battle between the super undead and the elders was fierce and brutal. The fort's inhabitants watched as one of the elders fell, overwhelmed by the sheer strength of these enhanced undead. It was a stark display of the power these creatures possessed. However, the remaining elders, though clearly exhausted and drained, eventually gained the upper hand. After a grueling fight, the elders managed to subdue their undead adversaries, but did not linger to celebrate their victory. Instead, they vanished into the night, leaving behind a battlefield strewn with the fallen, a testament to the ferocity of the conflict. The people of the fort were left in a state of mixed relief and confusion. The elders' intervention had inadvertently protected them, but the motive behind it remained unclear. Was it a mere coincidence, or part of a larger strategy? As the night wore on, the residents of the fort remained vigilant, aware that the line between ally and predator in this new world was as thin as ever. Clash of Titans. In the dense woodlands, the Alpha ran with its pack, a blur of motion under the canopy. Amidst the rhythmic sounds of paws against the earth, a deep, primal call resonated within the Alpha, a voice more felt than heard. This ancient summons spoke of urgency and purpose. The Lycan must grow their ranks. The Alpha was to use its cursed bite to convert humans into Lycan, for a war was brewing, a war of the supernaturals where speed and strength would determine survival. As the voice echoed through the woods, it warned of the undead and elders who were also amassing their forces, each looking to bolster their armies with the living. Sensing a nearby human community through their heightened senses, the pack adjusted their path, their pace quickening with purpose. Approaching the edges of a small settlement recently constructed, from the survivors of other communities, the Lycan observed a grim scene. At the gates, a group of undead was already engaging in what appeared to be an attempt to breach the defenses. Unlike any undead they had previously encountered, these possessed a formidable, godlike aura. The Alpha, leading the pack from the front, didn't hesitate. With a powerful leap, it pounced on the first of these enhanced undead creatures. A tremendous swipe from the Alpha sent the creature flying, an attack that would have felled any ordinary foe. Yet, astonishingly, the undead rose again, its eyes burning with an unnatural fire as it counterattacked. The ensuing battle tested the Alpha's agility and strength as never before. After a fierce struggle, the Alpha managed to dispatch this formidable opponent. However, more undead pressed forward, slow but immensely powerful. Each blow they landed carrying the potential to seriously injure even the strongest Lycan. The pack rallied around the Alpha, engaging the undead with ferocity and precision. Normally, a skirmish with such odds would have been decisively quick, but these undead were different. Though the Lycan eventually overcame their adversaries, the toll was heavy. Fatigued and requiring time to heal, the pack could not afford another immediate confrontation. The small human community, witnessing this supernatural battle, watched in disbelief. Their fate hung in the balance, subject to the outcome of these violent encounters. As the Lycan retreated to their den for much-needed recovery, the humans were left to ponder their precarious position in a world where they were but pawns in a larger, more brutal game. The community's leaders gathered to discuss their options. With supernatural forces vying to claim them, they needed to fortify their defenses and perhaps seek alliances that could offer some semblance of protection. As night fell over the settlement, the air was thick with tension and uncertainty. The battle may have ended for the moment, but the war, the great war of the supernaturals, was just beginning, and every living soul was at risk of being swept away in its tides. The precarious balance. As the dust settled from the latest skirmishes, a deep unease permeated the air, touching all the corners of the supernatural and human worlds alike. The relentless battle to expand their ranks among the undead, Lycan, and elders had inadvertently disrupted the delicate balance of nature. This imbalance prompted a critical question. What would happen if one supernatural faction became too dominant? Could the natural order survive such a shift, or would it precipitate far worse consequences? Elder, in his pursuit of power, had used the undead's energy for his own gain, not fully understanding the consequences. His actions had not only exploited a vulnerability in the supernatural ecosystem, but had also invited the attention of higher, more powerful beings. This interference had now set the stage for potential calamity, affecting all who dwelt within this increasingly volatile environment. As the supernatural entities vied for dominance, the human survivors found themselves caught in an ever-tightening vice. The fort, under the leadership of Captain Harris, Samantha, and Commander Lewis, stood as a beacon of human resilience. But for how long? And what of the other scattered enclaves, like the camp led by Alex, Captain Knox, and Alana? Their struggles to survive and rebuild amidst such overwhelming odds painted a stark portrait of human vulnerability in a world that no longer favored them. The chapter closes with these pressing questions. Who will manage to build their ranks first among the supernatural factions? And amidst these titans clashing, what chance do the humans have to survive, let alone thrive? Teasing the next part of the saga, Crimson Dawn Part 8 promises to explore these very dilemmas. The undead, Lycan, and elders are on a collision course, with each faction desperate to assert its dominance. Meanwhile, Marco, Nina, and Rachel embark on a crucial mission to unite the disparate human camps. Their journey is one not just of survival, but of finding a way to gain an edge. In a world that seems increasingly inclined to grind humanity underfoot. In the next installment, readers will dive deeper into the chaos and power struggles of a world where supernatural forces collide with the indomitable spirit of humanity. Will the natural balance be restored, or will the actions of a few tip the scales towards a darker, irreversible future? Find out in Crimson Dawn Part 8, where the fate of all hangs precariously in the balance.